Welcome back to the Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. Should Congress cut wasteful spending by the federal government, or should we simply shut the government down for a while? I'd take the latter rather than the former. Let's go to Brandon Arnold, who's Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Brandon, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Congress is finally coming back to work at long last after taking their big, long break.
For better or for worse, they'll be back next week.
Yeah, and I guess I don't see the reason that they should take the break anyway, but that's a subject for another day. So now what they have to do, because they have to come up with some kind of budget by the 30th of September, or the whole place shuts down, which Donald Trump's done it before. Is that maybe the best way to get something done, or does it usually end with they simply come back, all the workers who didn't work get paid anyway, and taxpayers get stuck with the bill?
Yeah, that's typically the scenario here. Unfortunately, what we've done is provide a tremendous amount of discretion to the president, and that could be beneficial in a scenario, but in the past, it's been the scenario that you described, where Biden, Obama, previous Democratic presidents, after the shutdown ends, it's business as usual, but a little bit worse because we give back pay to federal workers, and we end up with a larger budget as Republicans make concessions to the Democrats. In this scenario, I think the playing field is a little bit more tilted in the direction of President Trump and congressional Republicans, but it's still a dangerous game that they're playing out here. Shutting down certain federal agencies and so forth can disrupt services. It can slow changes that are made for Social Security beneficiaries and Medicare beneficiaries. The checks will still go out the door. The programs will still function, but there could be some hiccups along the way as some of the personnel won't be able to work. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think the solution should be pretty straightforward. We cut spending. We push a funding bill through this Congress and to the president's desk, and we keep the lights on and we start making headway toward that $37 trillion national debt.
I mean, is there a possibility we could get some progress on this? And by that I mean, over the years I've had members of Congress and others, economists, say, hey, how about the penny plan? This year you get 99%, 99 cents on the dollar for every dollar you had to spend last year. You figure out how best to cut that out of your agency's budget and still do the job. And then next year, 99 cents out of that. They say in 5 years, you've got a balanced budget. And at that point, you could start paying down that debt. Is Congress just so feckless that it refuses to do that? Because I can't think of a lot of agencies where if you went to a major agency and said, hey, you got $100 million this year, next year you're getting 99. Figure out where to make the $1 million in cuts. That it is impossible for them to do that, because I see private companies do that all the time.
Yeah, tightening the belt. It's what families do. It's what businesses do. It's what the federal government ought to do. And Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, he introduces that penny plan, as you know well, virtually every funding cycle. And every funding cycle, it gets about as many votes as on my right hand. There just simply isn't that much support among Congress, let alone the federal bureaucracy, to start tightening the belt. And that's the real problem. Hopefully that narrative is changing. Like I said, $37 trillion in debt. That's more than $100,000 per American, man, woman, and child. At some point, we have to just put up our hands and say enough is enough. And I'm hoping that, you talk about the penny plan, you talk about what President Trump is doing with the rescissions packages, starting to trim spending that way, start talking about what happened with the One Big Beautiful Bill. Imperfect, but it certainly had a lot of spending reductions, reforms to popular programs like Medicaid that were long overdue. So hopefully that tide is starting to turn. It's not going to be something that happens quickly, but it needs to happen as quickly as possible, because we simply cannot continue to spend at the rate that we're spending and borrow at the rate that we're borrowing.
Yeah, we can't. And Brandon, one of the things that encouraged me was when the federal government under Trump said, look, we're going to start insisting on work requirements for social welfare programs like SNAP and TANF and Section 8 and all the rest of that. And I know that a lot of people say, well, how much? That's not a gigantic. If you add all those programs up, it's hundreds of billions, but it doesn't begin to approach the amount we're overspending, which is closer to $2 trillion. But if you did that, all of a sudden you have somebody who was taking food stamps and now they're working and they're not, or they're not taking as much. That could begin to bend that curve, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no way we can cut $2 trillion from a single program and balance the budget. We have to find as many, dollars and nickels and quarters and under the couch cushions as we possibly can. And certainly those types of changes are much bigger than that. It's just amazing to hear so many Americans, when you talk about cutting Medicaid, they reflexively no. And then when you start talking about the reforms that you just described, saying, hey, if you're able-bodied, you're able to go out there and work, you should be required to do that before you get checks from the federal government. And working actually has a pretty broad definition. You can even be volunteering. You can go to your church and synagogue and volunteer. You can be in school. You can be, getting your education, working toward a job training that you need to get a job. There's so many different ways that you can do this. It's just so common sense that when you explain it to people, the light bulb goes off and say, yeah, this is how it ought to be. Unfortunately, the narrative is very dramatically coming from the mass media and so forth, saying, these are draconian cuts to these popular programs, and everyone's going to be dying out in the street due to Republicans.
And Brandon, I've done this over and over with my audience, and I've challenged them. Go ahead, tell me if I'm wrong about this. I wish the mainstream media and the cartel media, even at the local levels in all these cities around America, when they have a governor that comes out and says, well, Donald Trump is cutting X amount from Medicaid, I wish one of them would stand up and say, Governor, he's saying that you can't have Medicaid if you're able-bodied, childless, of working age. So not children, not elderly, you don't have any kids at home, and you're just a deadbeat, you're not doing a job. Should those people get taxpayer-funded health insurance? If they ask that once of a governor, and that was on television or radio or the internet or whatever else, it would communicate volumes, I think, to the public. You say, the governor just defended the idea that my deadbeat brother-in-law who won't get off the couch and go find a job for 20 hours a week, he's going to get free health insurance paid for by me. And yet these governors just get away with saying he's cutting $88 million or he's cutting $92 billion or whatever out of Medicaid without saying, well, who's getting cut? Well, illegal aliens, transgender surgeons, and deadbeats who won't get up and get a job even though they are childless, able-bodied, not children, not elderly. They're getting cut. I would think the average American would say, yeah, they shouldn't be getting free stuff from us. Tell them to go out and get a job.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And when you pose those questions to people, these policies are overwhelmingly popular. The problem is when you just say, should we cut Medicaid? Should we put, needy people out on the street, rip their health care from them, and force them to fend for themselves? That's absolutely not what's taking place in this legislation. It's, as you described, it's reasonable changes, reforms, strengthening these programs. We don't talk about this often as we ought to. These programs are going bankrupt.
That's Brandon Arnold, who is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Brandon, have a wonderful Labor